What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy and welcome back to another countdown video here on the channel, and today we are counting down our top 5 worst cards from Crimson Invasion. So if you did miss it, we did post our top 10 best cards here on the channel as well, so I will have a link to that in the description if you want a slightly more optimistic video. But today we are going to be talking about the worst of the worst, the absolute most terrible cards to come out of the set, and I gotta be honest, we almost should have done a top 10 for this. There's that many stinkers in this set. So, I have mentioned in other videos, Crimson Invasion, not the best Sun and Moon set. I think probably the worst one out of all the ones we've had. So making a top 5 worst cards was actually pretty easy to do. So before we get into the actual countdown itself though, do want to mention a couple things. So in order to be on this list, it has to be the final evolution of a Pokemon. So that means we aren't going to be listing things like Alolan Geodudes or anything like that. We are only going to be mentioning either a basic that doesn't evolve or its final evolution. Otherwise, you would just have a bunch of lists, or you just have a list of a bunch of Pokemon that did like 10 damage for 1 energy, for example. So none of that nonsense going on. And also, we're not featuring any reprints of any cards that were already in the format prior to Crimson Invasion. So that means things like Warp Energy, Full Art Olivia, and other things like that won't be making an appearance on this list. And before we get to the number 5 spot, we are going to kick things off with our pick for the worst GX in the set. So in most cases, even the worst GXs that come out of these sets are still better than most of your average cards that appear in the set. So we didn't want to include this in the official top 5. But taking the spot for the worst GX in the set is going to be Alolan Golem. So this was actually a pretty close one. It was a toss-up between Alolan Golem GX or Gyarados GX, but I think Alolan Golem is just a tiny bit worse. They're both pretty bad, but I think this one narrowly edges it out. So let's take a look at it and see why we are, talking so much junk on Alolan Golem. So it is a Stage 2 GX with 250 hit points, which, to be fair, is a solid amount of hit points, but it's the attacks that make this card so bad. So its first attack, Hammer In for a Lightning Energy and Double Colorless, does 80 damage. Just a vanilla 80 damage. With a Choice Band, you do hit for 110. To be fair, that does two-shot a lot of things in the current format. But for a Stage 2, for 3 energy to do 80, it's just not worth the amount of resources to get this card in play. But you might be thinking, well, it might have some other good attacks, but spoiler alert, it does not. So next up we have Super Electromagnetic Tackle. For 2 lightning energy and 2 colorless energy, it does 200 damage, and this Pokemon does 50 damage to itself. So you might be thinking, well, 200 damage, that's a good bit of damage. So how can this card be that bad? Well, you're putting yourself down at 200 hit points. You're taking, literally a fifth of your own HP to do the attack. Yes, with a Choice Band, you hit for 230, which is actually a pretty good number to hit for. But, getting 4 energy on this guy is going to be a bit of a chore in and of itself. And then, if you look at the most popular deck in the current format is Gardevoir. So basically, any card that has a massive attack cost like this is going to be punished very easily by Gardevoir. Even if you are going against a Gardevoir deck and you manage to knock out one of theirs, they can easily return knock you out. And it's much easier for them to keep streaming energy to take one-hit knockouts every turn than it is for Alolan Golem, just because it has such a massive attack cost. And then its GX move is going to be Heavy Rock GX for the same attack cost of 2 lightning and 2 colorless. Does 100 damage, and your opponent can't play any cards from their hand during their next turn. And I have to say, the effect of Heavy Rock GX is actually insane. We've had a lot of cards in the past that prevent your opponent from playing item cards or special energies or things like that, but as far as I can remember, I don't think we've had one that prevents them from playing any cards whatsoever. So the effect of this attack is definitely good, but the damage output is very bad. 100 damage is not very good for 4 energy. Honestly, I'd rather play a different GX, take a one-hit knockout with a lower attack cost, and let my opponent play cards on their next turn. Now, granted, there are going to be some situations where the effect of this can kind of, put your opponent in a really terrible spot, but just generally, I don't think this card is worth powering up. And that brings us to, how are you even going to power it up? So there is the option to play Magnezone, which is another stage 2 though. I really don't think you can afford to set up Magnazones and Alolan Golems. That's two different stage 2 lines, and I just don't think it's that good, because not only do you need two stage 2s, but you need a lot of energy in hand to accelerate with Magnezone as well. Even Raichu GX has kind of struggled to be partnered with Magnezone, and that's only a stage 1, so I don't think Alolan Golem is definitely good in that regard. So the other popular option would be Electrode. And Electrode, though I do think it is a decent card, I don't like the idea of your entire deck being based around knocking your own Pokemon out to accelerate energy and then doing damage to your own Pokemon with Alolan Golem. You're just really putting yourself at too much of a disadvantage going for some sort of strategy like that. So I think it's just very awkward and difficult to even power up Alolan Golem efficiently, and much less keep powering up multiple Alolan Golems throughout the course of a game. So that is why Alolan Golem is going to be coming in at the worst GX spot in the entire set. But coming in at the number 5 spot in this list, we have Escavalier. So Escavalier is continuing the tradition of bringing us no playable Escavaliers ever since I think the first one was printed, all the way back in like it's probably Black and White, or Noble Victories or something around that era in the Black and White block. But ever since then, we have yet to have an Escavalier, and the Crimson Invasion one is no different. So let's take a look at it and see what makes this card so terrible. So it's a 120 hit point, stage 1, which is a decent amount of HP for just a stage 1. But let's look at its attacks. That's really where this card shines, or, well, I should say doesn't shine. So its first attack is going to be Fury Attack, just for a single metal energy. Flip 3 coins, this attack does 30 damage for each heads. So you might be thinking, well, if you flip 3 coins, you can do 90 damage for 1 energy, which, to be fair, is a pretty good damage to energy ratio. But most of the time, honestly, you're going to be hovering somewhere around 60 damage, maybe even about 30. But let's just say on average about 60, which is still an okay damage to energy ratio. With the choice band, you'll hit for 90. But this is the final evolution of Escavalier. It does not evolve any further, so you can't really base a deck around that attack, I don't think. And then its other attack, Iron Tackle, for 2 metal energy and a colorless, does 130, and this Pokemon does 30 damage to itself. Granted, this can knock out things like Gardevoir GX in one hit, but there's just so many other better metal type attackers that accomplish the same thing. You have things like Scizor EX and even the Cobalion from Steam Siege, which are basics that can do the same thing, but debatably better and faster, since they are basic Pokemon and have more support being basics. There's also the new Registeel, which came out of Crimson Invasion, that can also do the same thing. Yet another basic Pokemon with plenty of support. So it's not that Escavalier's attacks are just that outright terrible, since they, do have a decent energy to damage ratio. But the problem is this card is just completely outclassed in every way possible. I really don't see any reason to ever play this card when so many other better metal attackers exist that are basics and are easier to power up. So coming in at the number 4 spot, we have Gastrodon. It's another stage 1 Pokemon, much like Escavalier, has 120 hit points. Has a 3 retreat cost, which is kind of annoying, but luckily you can search it out with Heavy Ball. That is the one redeeming factor to it. But really what makes this card so terrible is its attacks. So its first attack, Eerie Fluid, for a fighting and colorless energy, does 30 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. So this attack is just completely and utterly outclassed by other fighting Pokemon in the current format. So we have the new Buzzwole GX that just came out in Crimson Invasion, another popular fighting Pokemon. It's a basic Pokemon with 190 hit points, way more than the 120 on Gastrodon. It has a similar attack to do 30 damage, but it's for 1 fighting energy, and it does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon as well. So it's also a basic, which means it's much easier to get in play. Also has support with things like Silvally GX, giving it free retreat, Max Elixir if you choose to accelerate energy quicker onto it. But the confusion with this attack, Eerie Fluid, is just not that great. Confusion is a decent status condition, but right now in the current format, there's so many different ways to switch out of the active spot, and even still, even if your opponent remains confused, 30 damage for 2 energy is utterly terrible, especially on a stage 1. You know, like I said, Buzzwole can hit 30 just for a single fighting energy. There's also other, stage 1 Pokemon in the current format. You have even like the Lucario back from, I believe it's Fates Collide, hits 40 damage for 1 fighting energy. So I don't know why you would ever even play that Gastrodon when something like that exists. You also have Zygarde EX, which can hit 40 for a 1 fighting energy as well. Also is a basic with 190 hit points. So the first attack is just completely bad. And then the second attack, Earthquake, for 2 fighting energy and a colorless is 120. And this attack does 10 damage to each of your own benched Pokemon. So 3 fighting for 120. First of all, well, I shouldn't say that. 2 fighting and a colorless, but most of the time it is going to be 3 fighting. So the first thing is, how are you even going to power this thing up? Fighting is, kind of notorious for having pretty bad energy acceleration in the current format. Yes, there are things like Carbink Break to accelerate energy, but that is a stage 1 that you have to set up to start powering up this guy. And, just looking at the format, this attack is just so outclassed by so many other things in the format that have a similar attack cost. Look at Lycanroc GX. Either of the Lycanroc GXs that are in format have a similar attack cost, but have much better attacks. Even if this attack didn't damage your own bench and damage your opponent's bench, the attack is just not good enough. Yes, you can two-shot a lot of things in the format with this attack, but the problem is if you're playing some sort of Gastrodon deck, you're not really going to have a reliable way of powering up your Gastrodons. You do have access to things like Wishful Baton, just as an example, to potentially keep your energy in play, but Wishful Baton and EXP Share both are kind of susceptible to Field Blowers. They're very passive tools. You might not ever get use out of them before they get discarded, especially with most decks in the current format playing on average 2 Field Blowers. It's not uncommon for that to actually happen. So much like Escavalier, this attack is just completely and utterly outclassed by similar Pokemon, and like I said, it damages your own bench Pokemon, which you definitely don't want to do. You could play ways to heal your bench and things like that if you really, really wanted to, but honestly, why play Gastrodon when so many other better options exist in the format? So up next at the number 3 spot, we have yet another 120 hit point stage 1 Pokemon. This is going to be a Wigglytuff. So let's look at Wigglytuff and see what makes it so bad. 120 hit points is okay on a stage 1, like I've mentioned for the past 2 cards that we've covered. 2 retreat costs, pretty average, Metal Weak, Dark Resistant, all pretty standard things. But let's look at its attacks. So its first attack, Hypnoblast, for 2 colorless energy, does 30 damage and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. So 30 for 2 in a status condition is not that good, like we just mentioned with Gastrodon. Granted, you can play things like Choice Band, and you can also play double colorless energy on Wigglytuff to basically do 30 for 1 energy and put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. But sleep is one of the weakest status conditions in the game. 50% of the time, your opponent's Pokemon will actually wake up and you won't even get the effect of the sleep. But, you can't really build a deck around this card. This is not that great of an attack. There's other Pokemon in the current format, like we just mentioned. Buzzwole can do 30 to your opponent's active and 30 to one of their bench Pokemon for just a single fighting energy, which is very strong. Similarly, for a double colorless energy, you could play things like Tapu Koko to do 20 to all of your opponent's Pokemon, or like the Latios from Shining Legends to do 30 to their active and 31 to their bench Pokemon. I think even that would outclass Wigglytuff. All of those Pokemon are basics and not stage 1s as well. But maybe its other attack is, can make up for it, but unfortunately, I don't think that is the case at all. So it has Punishing Slap. For a Fairy Energy and 2 colorless, it does 60, plus 60 more if any of your opponent's Pokemon have any Dark Energy attached to them. So it's meant to be some sort of Dark Pokemon counter, but Fairy Pokemon are already resistant to Dark to begin with, which is very good. And then we have Fairy Pokemon in the current format that can already hit for damage way beyond what Wigglytuff can do. Look at the Gardevoir GX that we currently have in the format. debatably the best deck in the format and has basically an unlimited damage cap. So if your opponent's playing dark Pokemon anyways, Gardevoir is probably just going to tear them apart. Granted, that is a stage 2, but that's an attack that's good against everything. This is only specifically against Pokemon with dark energy, which definitely limits the use for this Wigglytuff. The other instance I could see this Wigglytuff being for is to counter potentially dragon type Pokemon that have rainbow energy attached to them. But yet again, I would argue fairy types are already great against dragon Pokemon since they're all weak to fairy anyways. So why not just play a fairy type attacker that can beat other decks and not just dark decks and dragon decks. And 3 energy for 120 is just not that good. Even if this was 3 energy, 120 damage, I would still be skeptical of how much play this would receive. But the fact that it's 60 base damage and it only does 120 when your opponent has dark energy attached to their Pokemon, this attack, it just has such a narrow window of use. I can never justify ever running this Wigglytuff when so many other better options exist. Alright guys, our runner-up for the worst card to come out of Crimson Invasion is going to be Accelgor. So Accelgor is a new Stage 1 Pokemon with only 90 hit points. So it has less HP than the other Stage 1s that we've been covering on this list. But let's look at its attacks, and they don't get any better than that either. So the first one we have is Recover. For a single colorless energy, you discard an energy from this Pokemon and heal all damage from it. But the problem is you have 90 hit points. What damage are you actually healing? This dude is going to be bodied and laid out before he ever gets a chance to heal anything. Now, granted, if your opponent is going for some sort of weird spread strategy or something like that with like an Espeon GX or Tapu Koko or something along those lines, you could make use of Recovery. But it's still your attack for the turn. Even if this was an ability, I would still say this card is terrible. But the fact that this is an attack just makes it that much worse. So Recover, this is one of the most useless attacks I could have seen being printed on this card. Maybe if it was discard an energy from this Pokemon and heal damage from one of your Pokemon, other than Accelgor maybe, that could be a little bit more useful. But yet again, I still would say that is a terrible attack that won't see play. But let's look at its other attack. It has Speed Attack for a Grass and Colorless to 70 damage. Just 70 damage. 2 for 70. Honestly, not the most terrible damage to, energy ratio. But Accelgor is the final evolution. It does not evolve any further, so this is as good as it gets. Like, granted, there are worse cards out there, but you would have to. I mean, why would you play this? like, why would you ever play this? Though this is the final evolution. You can't build a deck around this card. It's not a good tech attacker against many things. Granted, if you have a choice band, you're hitting for 100 against grass weak Pokemon. Or grass weak GXs, I should specify. But even still, like, there's so many other better grass attackers in the game, I feel like. I mean, granted, if you have counter energy, you could just do Speed Attack for just a single attachment. But again, why are you even playing Accelgor to begin with? This is, like I said, 70 damage is as good as it gets with this guy. Compare this to, for example, Golisopod GX, which can do 120 for a single grass energy. Granted, its attack is much more conditional, but it's much easier to, I think, build an entire deck around that. It can also hit for higher numbers with its other attacks, specifically its GX move, and also can tank with its Armor Press attack. So, yet again, if you're going to play a Stage 1 grass Pokemon, I don't see any reason why you would ever consider this Accelgor. Maybe for some reason, if there is an Accelgor GX, you play this as a one-of or something. But even still, that is a very, very, very hard sell, and I don't ever expect this card to ever see competitive play whatsoever. Alright guys, you know what time it is. It's time to cover the absolute worst card to come out of Crimson Invasion. We had a lot to go through to make this list, but this one I think is going to take the cake. And that is going to be Starmie, which actually pains me to say because I do enjoy Starmie as a Pokemon in general. But this card is pretty darn terrible. So Starmie is a 90 hit point water Pokemon. Has this ability called Escape. Well, actually, let's cover the attack first. It has Spinning Attack for a single colorless energy, does 40 damage. Honestly, Just to be fair, not the worst energy to damage ratio there is. With a choice band, you are hitting for 70, so 1 energy for 70 is, not too bad. But you have to think, this is a stage 1. There's Pokemon who can, do similar amounts of damage that are basics for 1 energy. If you have the new Buzzwole GX with a choice band, you're hitting 60 for 1 energy and doing damage to their bench. If you have a strong energy on them, you're actually doing 80 to the active and 30 to the bench. So again, I think there's better 1 energy attackers already. But you might be thinking, well, okay, maybe you're not playing Starmie for its attack. Because you certainly cannot, I don't think. So let's look at the ability and see, maybe it has a cool ability. The other Starmie has that Space Beacon ability, which is the main reason it sees play. So maybe this is the reason we play Starmie, for its ability. So let's check it out. It has Escape. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck. Well, I can't blame you, because you probably got this card out and you realized how bad it was, and you're like, oh wait, I don't need this. This card will never do anything for me in a match, so I need to shuffle it back into my deck and free up some bench space for some more useful Pokemon that I could play instead. So yeah, this ability is absolutely terrible. I don't see really many uses why you would ever want to play this. You could, in theory, prevent yourself from decking out by playing this Escape ability. But I would argue, why not just play an extra copy of Rescue Stretcher or something like that to shuffle cards back into your deck. And that way you could actually get useful cards back into your deck. Rescue Stretcher will let you get 3 Pokemon. Chances are they are going to be better than Starmie. It wouldn't be hard. And you can put those back into your deck instead. But beyond that, I don't really see many uses for this card. You could maybe play this as a bench sitter in your Zoroark GX type of deck just to do some extra bench damage, but even still, why? There's so many other better bench sitters. I just don't really see the application for this card. This is just one of the most useless cards I think Pokemon has printed in quite some time. But yeah, unfortunately, there's not much more to say about Starmie. Well, actually, it's probably a good thing there's not much more to say, just because we are literally wasting time from our lives having to even look at this card. I know that's pretty harsh to say, but we could be talking about so many better cards instead. But yeah, that is going to be Starmie, guys. Like I said, I think this is probably the worst card to come out of Crimson Invasion. But I'm sure you guys have your own thoughts and feelings. Did I miss any from this list? Do you think I was being too hard on any of these cards? Do you think any of them should have actually been lower on the list, or maybe not at all? Definitely sound off below in the comments section. I'd love to hear your feedback about this list as well. But yeah, guys, as usual, feel free to like and subscribe. And like I said, if you did miss our top 10 best Crimson Invasion cards, I will have a link to that in the description too, so definitely go check that out. But also, if you can support us over on patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or pick up something from our online store at rarecandytcg.com, it would be greatly appreciated. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you for the next one.